In this video, I'm going to show you 8 mixing tips that saved me 8 years of my life. And by the end of this video, I guarantee that these tips will cut years off your learning curve as well and make mixing more fun. So here's a quick before and after. Awesome. I'm also going to make every tip that I go through in this video available within a cheat sheet that you can download for free using the link down below. So let's dive in. The very first thing we need to do before we set up our mix, before we can even imagine mixing, is structure our template. You can see that we have so many tracks loaded up here with so many different colors. The names are completely off and I can't get a visual overview of the elements. So we have to organize our session and group tracks by category and instruments. So that's what I'm going to do now. Therefore, I'm going to listen to each and every single track from top to bottom, give it a name, give it a category, and put those into groups. Cool, so the first guy we're going to call Perk 1. And you can hit Command and Solo to solo multiple tracks at once instead of one track at a time. And that's what I like to do when it comes to naming and listening to my percussions. Perk 2. Okay, so this is going to be Tom. Let's continue. Tom 2. So I can give these toms a different color because I know these are more bass heavy elements. I like to make them red, and let's pull them up for now. Let's continue listening. So this is going to be Tom 3. Pull it up to the rest of the toms. Also give it a red color. Assign track color to clips. Perk 3. Perk 4. And if you feel like your elements are stacking up way too much, you can just solo individual tracks and name them accordingly this way. So this is hat 1. And to save time, I'm going to fast forward this entire process so you get to see the structured mix at the end. And what I'm going to do now is group tracks by category, starting off with the tom above here. Group that, take all these percussion channels, put those into a group like that. You can also click the group and right click it and give them all a color like this. Then you'll right click again, assign track color to grouped tracks and clips. There you go. Then they all have the same color. Percussion. Same for the hats. We're going to group the hats together into a group. And we're going to put all these other hats and top loops into this group, call them tops. Now we can all give them the same color. Same for these claps over here. Let's call them claps and give them the same color. There we go. I usually like to have the kick at the very top of my session, so I'm just going to drag it to the top over here. So the bass we're going to make red. Put the toms next to the bass. There we go. Melodies I usually like to have blue, which is great. And we're going to group all these melodic elements in the pads into a single group. Give it a bluish color because I do like keeping them blue, and assign track color to clips. Melody, toms, bass, claps, tops, percussion, and kick. There we go. And Ableton Live also lets you group together groups. So what you can do is then just hit this to fold the group together like that. And what I'm going to do is group together the claps, the tops, and the percussion into a drums group. So we're going to call this drums/high. So all the higher frequency drums are in a single group. Nice. So now that we have our session structured, we can move on to step 2, which is leveling. The first thing you want to do before you start mixing in your DAW is make sure that you set your interface to a comfortable volume. And I have my main output meter set to about 10 or 11 o'clock. I'll just add a screenshot here. I'm at a comfortable volume. I don't have to pull my interface all the way up or mix at a very quiet volume. 10, 11 o'clock for the main output meter is usually what works best for me. Now we can get to the DAW. What we're going to do is reset the levels to -infinity for each and every single track. Keep in mind that you want to do it for the individual tracks and not the groups. We only want to process the tracks only, and you can highlight multiple tracks and drag down the gain or the level to minus infinity this way. So again, we're not going to pull down the groups here. We're only going to pull down the volume on the individual channels. Shift, select multiple tracks, drag down to minus infinity this way. Claps, same thing, only the individual tracks, down to minus infinity. Toms, individual tracks, minus infinity. Bass, minus infinity. Melodic elements, minus infinity. And now you can start leveling by priority. And you want to start with the most important elements of your mix. For me, that's kick and bass. Those are the most challenging to mix. So I'm going to start with kick. Kick is also the element that plays throughout the entire track, especially in house music, house and techno. So I'm going to set it to a volume that I feel comfortable with again. And you want to make sure that your master is also set to 0 dB. So now we can set the gain of the kick accordingly. Okay, I feel like I'm at a comfortable volume now. I can hear it well through my speakers, and I don't have a feeling that it's too quiet or too loud because I set my interface volume properly in the first place. So kick. Nice. Now let's move on to the toms, starting off with tom number 1. Tom number 2. Tom number 3. And the bass. Cool. I can get back to the kick, dial it down a bit. Nice. And now let's move on. Let's move on to the percussion. Percussion 1. And you can close your eyes if you like, so you can really hear the sounds, focus on hearing the sounds. Doesn't need to be perfect, just do what feels right. Okay, let's move on to the tops, the hat number 1. Just mixing in these tracks here slowly. Okay, that's too loud. For my hats group, I feel like this is my main hi-hat. This is the one that I want to be the loudest out of all the other elements. So every element that I mix in should sit below the main hi-hat, the hi-hat number 1, right? Nice. Now the claps. And pay attention how much character each and every single one of your layer adds to your mix. This one feels more like a rim shot, like a short snare hit. This one over here feels more like an organic hand clap. This one feels a bit more tight. This one more loose. So let's mix these in together. Also clap number 3. This one feels more like a low end clap. You can also rename them accordingly, like clap low, clap hands, clap rim. So you know which one has which character. And now let's go to the pad. Ooh. Slowly mix them in. I always like to keep my pads very subtle. ear candy is also just background, right? So we don't want to have it too loud. But I'm going with what feels right. If I feel like pulling it up all the way, sure thing. You know, close your eyes, listen to the mix, and set the levels to where they feel right. There's no right or wrong. Nice. And if you feel like you have sounds that are recorded way too quietly, like this one over here, percussion number 4, you can barely see it on the WAV file. What you can do is double click the sound and increase the input gain over here, so you see more of the WAV file. Then you'll have to accordingly level it down over here. So if I were to duplicate this channel till the very end, see, I'd have to pull it back a bit more using the main output meter here. That's what input gain is for. So make sure to not use this gain panel over here as your mixing parameter. You want to do the mixing over here because you get a better visual overview, especially if you head into tab, you can see your individual tracks in a vertical view. This gives you more control over your mix rather than doing your mixing in here. Back in the day when I was using FL Studio, I'd do the mixing using the clip gain, which is not what it's for. It doesn't give you a structured overview over your levels. Step number 3 is the main processing. And herefore, I usually like to start off with low cuts, low cut EQs on the channels that do not need any bass. And what we're gonna do is start off by loading an EQ onto our group channels. So this drums high channel, this does not need any low end. Our low end should only be covered by the kick, tom, and the bass. So what we're gonna do is load up the EQ. I prefer using EQ8 on this drums high group. I already have a low cut set by default, which saves me time. And because these recordings are quite clean, I've selected samples that don't have a lot of low end from the start, which means there isn't that much low end going on. But there's still some mud, you see? You want to cut that out. And I prefer using not too harsh EQs like this because they tend to sound quite unnatural. So you want to select a slope that's rather smoother, like a 12 dB, 6 dB slope works well on low cuts. And I'm going to set it to about 150 Hertz. That usually works best for me. Now I'm going to copy this EQ and put it onto other channels. So you see all the tops, the percussion and the claps are going into this drums high group. This has an EQ applied onto it, so I don't have to apply an EQ onto each and every single one of these layers, which also saves me CPU and time. And the melody, I'm going to paste the EQ here as well on the melody group. So let's play this together. Look how much low-end mud there's going on. That's just not what we want. So again, about 150 Hertz, 160 in this case. And if there's an element in your mix that you feel like is standing out too much and is still taking up too much space, despite the EQs that you have set on the group, you can either dial it down using your volume, the gain here on the mixer channel. But if you feel like there's still too many frequencies that are cluttering the mix, you can then add an EQ, and I'm going to do that for this ambient swell pad that I have going on in the background. Like you can see there's a lot of mid-range, and the mid-range frequency is usually dominated by the melody and the percussions. So what I'm going to do, since I want to have this pad in the background, is split the frequencies and only allow in those high-end fidelity frequencies here. You see how much more space comes into the mix? It's called background pad for a reason. So this is something that I'd highly recommend you do. Go through your tracks and determine which elements you'd like to have in the background. If dialing down the volume doesn't help, add an EQ and split those frequencies. Cool. I feel like these ear candy percussions, they also need an EQ. Yeah, much better. Yeah, I like this ear candy melodic stuff. They don't need to have a lot of space in the mix. These are more of a background element. An important part of the main processing is to also pan your individual elements. Let's say you have multiple percussions playing at the same time and they're all coming from the middle. That's usually not what you want. You want to have your percussion spread out a bit. So what I'm going to do now is start with the kick and solo my way through each and every single one of these layers and see where I'd like to have it placed in a room. Because usually if you have a drum set in front of you, you don't have all elements stacked on top of each other in the middle, right? You have the snare somewhere towards the left, you have the bass drum in the middle, hi-hats on the left and right. So you want to split those elements in the mix as well. So again, I'm going to start with the kick and solo my way through the elements. So this one I want in the middle, the perk 3, da-da-da-dum, in the middle, so more like a tom. And you can just test it out. Right, what feels natural to you? We get more stereo information now. Okay, slight panning is enough. Okay, these I'd like to have in the middle. Hat. Main hat, middle. Maybe one top loop on the left and one a bit more towards the right. Claps, maybe one to the left, one to the right. So we get a stereo clap. Nice. And the bass, the toms, you usually want to leave in the middle because those are very important elements. You don't want to have too much bass information on the side. So keep the bass and the toms in the middle. Melody, I usually don't do a lot of panning for the melodies. I keep them mostly centered. So it's mainly the percussion and the tops, the drums that need the panning. Nice. Next part of our main processing is to set up sidechain compression. And therefore, what we're going to do is load up a compressor on each and every single one of the group tracks. If you type in compressor, you can find it in Audio Effects Dynamics Compressor. Double click to load it in here. And what you want to do is open up this panel over here, select sidechain, input from kick. So right now I have a compressor loaded on my drums high group that is being triggered by the kick. So we leave more space for the kick, the important element of the mix. You see, this is the kick, and this is how much it's reducing the volume of our drums by 10 dB. It's a bit intense. Usually for this organic house style, we don't have that much sidechain compression going on. It's rather subtle. Yeah, you can just take these settings. They work best for me. But threshold is usually very unique, very individual for each track. Right, so we're going to copy this compressor and copy it over to our toms. Pay attention to how it is being triggered by the kick. Usually you want to have a bit more compression for the toms and the bass. So those bass frequencies don't interfere with each other. Nice, so we've done it for the toms. Now let's add it on the bass as well. Last but not least, the melodies. Copy, paste. Let's leave a bit more space for the melodies, right? And if you have too much sidechain compression on, whenever you disable the kick, all the other elements will become too loud in volume. That's not what you want. You want to sidechain enough so where the kick is off, all the other elements still come through naturally. Right, so we don't have any compression going on here. Now we have compression going on because the kick is playing. So So keep it soft and subtle. Sidechain compression really helps a lot to keep a clean mix. Step number 4 is creative processing. What you want to do therefore is now create return channels with reverb and delay. You create return channels by hitting Command Option T, and by enabling this R over here, you can then see your return channels popping up. So I'm hitting Control Option T. I believe on Windows it's Control Alt T. Yeah, just try out your different commands. You can also right click and then insert return track here. You see? So I'm just going to create 3 separate return channels. Going to call this one small reverb. This one I'm going to call large reverb, and this one I'm going to call delay. So we have 3 different effects that we can apply to our individual channels in a second. I'll make these all a bluish color so they are noticeable for me. On the small reverb return channel, I'm going to load up the default Ableton Live reverb that you can find here. We're going to let those high frequencies in, cut out the lows, maybe just adjust the curve a bit. A small decay is really important for a small reverb. 300 to 500 milliseconds works best for me. And since this effect is on a return channel, we want to make sure that it's on 100%. All the effects that come onto a return channel will always be set to 100% because we mix them in using other faders. I'll show you that in a second. So we have the reverb. We're going to call this small reverb. We're going to copy this reverb setting, paste it onto our large reverb return channel, increase the decay over here about to, let's say 4 seconds. 4 seconds is a really large reverb. I like that. And for the delay, you can load up any delay that you like. I'm just going to keep it with the standard delay by Ableton Live here. Let's keep it on 3. 3 sounds rhythmically a bit more interesting to me. You can also set it to 4. Choose whatever you like. You can also create another delay channel. So Command Alt T and call this one delay 4. And this one you can call delay 3. And I'll make a separate topic on this return channel thing later on. Today I just want to keep it all in one. So this is delay 3, copy 100%, paste, delay 4. So you get a bit more creative options here. All right, select, give them a color like that. There we go. Now if we open up our channels, you then see these panels open up over here. This is return channel A, B, C, D. So this one would be the small reverb. Pay attention to how it applies to this percussion sound here. And if I apply the large reverb here, B, ooh. This saves us a lot of time. If we apply effects to a return channel instead of the channel itself, it saves CPU. And it also allows us to mix our elements in cohesively so they all have a similar sound. So for the percussion, I usually like to keep a very small reverb. So I'm just gonna crank them up here. And you see I'm cranking it up all the way to 0 dB. That usually means I'm applying too much effect. So what I'm gonna do is just increase the decay time a bit more here. And for small reverbs, you usually don't want to have too much going on. You want to make it so that you can barely hear the reverb, right? Nice. And for these small percussive ear candies, you can crank up that reverb, that large reverb room. Ooh, nice. And how about we give it a bit of delay too? So these ear candy sounds, we give more delay. Okay, that's a bit too much reverb though. Let's take it back, the reverb. I'm doing this according to my taste. Now the hi-hats. Just a bit. You don't need to apply reverb to every single channel. You can always adjust your settings here. And feel free to exaggerate so you can hear the reverb and then dial it down. And this claps group, I'd like to apply the reverb to the group itself and not to the individual claps. So I can just pull up this guy over here. always go back to the return channel and mess around with the settings here. I usually like to pull these down to -2, -3. Toms, no reverb. We don't need reverb on the bass. Now the melodic elements. Start with the melody. Some delay. Ooh. So now we're applying this 3-bar delay and a 4-bar delay to our melody. Notice how it becomes more spacious in the mix now. It has more space. Ear candy, a lot of reverb and delay. Nice. Woo-hoo-hoo. So keep in mind that reverb and delay, the more you have on a track, the more present it becomes in the mix, the more stereo it also becomes. You have to remember, effects are stereo and they usually spread the elements in the mix, so your mix sounds a bit wider. Short reverbs work well on percussive elements. Long reverbs work well on melodic elements. Pro tip right there. Tip number 5 is to reset your kick. And this is severely underrated because if we mix our track and adjust the levels along the way, our kick either becomes too quiet or in most cases too loud. So what I like doing is pulling the kick back to -infinity, closing my eyes and slowly mixing it in until it sits right in the mix. Pay attention to how it feels like together with the bass elements especially. So I'm gonna play it. It's at -infinity now. Slowly mix it in. Remember, my eyes are closed. No peeking. Pull it back again. I can repeat this as many times as I'd like, and I really want to feel until it's right. So right there. There we go. Nice. And this usually gets us that extra 10% out of our kicks. Another kick trick I like to use is the Pultec EQ trick. Just load up an EQ8 on your kick track, and we're going to take away this low cut that I have set by default. You can give it a slight bass boost at around 40 to 50 hertz, just a bit, maybe like 2 or 3 dB. And you can give it a slight notch right next to that boost at around 100 hertz. And this is usually how the old-fashioned EQs used to work, mostly like those Pultec EQs. You can then highlight both of these and then increase the scale. So whenever you increase the bass, there's a dip in the mid frequencies, low mid frequencies. So you get to have a balance. The way these old EQs work is that they also create dips, right? Whenever a frequency is boosted, another is being reduced in volume, so we get a more even signal. So I can see it peaking over here, so I'm going to adjust. Just a bit. For this kick, I actually like the effect, so I'm going to keep it in. And for every kick, we have a transient, a click, that's around 5K. Maybe just boosting it a bit helps. But again, keep in mind, this is different for every single kick. I'd say for kicks, it's mostly important to select a kick that sounds somewhat fittable from the start and not having to tweak it so much. Because if you start tweaking and fiddling your kick, that's usually a signal that it's not the right kick to use. So you want to make sure that you select a kick that fits to all the other elements of your track. That's most important. Tip number 6 is group processing. Now that we have our levels set right, we want to do some group processing. And I'm going to start off with the drums. drums over here. So kick and drums, we're going to group those together. So these are going to be called drums all. And on this drums all group, we're going to load up a plugin called drum bus, which is under dynamics. No, it's actually under drive and color, drum bus loaded here. This Ableton stock effect is designed to process drum groups. A bus is a group essentially. So what we're going to do is turn on the compression here, and straight off the bat, it's going to be quite loud. So I'm going to reduce the output gain a bit. So we're applying compression and a bit of saturation, drive. We don't want to dampen too much of those high frequencies. We want to keep them in. And you can also mess with the transients here. But I try not to do too much here. Maybe reduce the dry wet a bit so we have more parallel compressing. You want to make sure that you're just gluing the drums together. You don't want to make them louder, which is why I'm also reducing the dry wet and the output gain. Now, drum bus is a really simple interface. I love how it compresses without giving you all the nitty-gritty little functions of a compressor, which can be quite overwhelming to understand. Our goal with the drum bus is to reduce the peaks in the sound and to glue our drums together, to make them feel like a cohesive unit, like they're playing together and not separately. This is what compression and saturation does. I've prepared a little drawing for you guys here to illustrate how exactly a drum bus would work, or how compression works specifically. You can see that you have a peak signal, especially in the drum group. You have a clap that goes really high, and you have a hi-hat which also peaks really high, and all those peaks, they add up. Those frequencies, they mash up together and they add up, which you don't want, because if you want to master your track in a later stage, having too many of these peaks can really cause you a hard time. So what you want to do is reduce those peaks by decreasing the threshold and increasing the ratio. All of these functions are included with every compressor. So the higher you increase the ratio and the lower the threshold, the less peaks get through, right? Some peaks still get through, like these ones over here, depending on the ratio that you've set or the attack and release times. But this results in a more squished sound, which is really usual for EDM, organic house, deep house. This means that you're reducing the dynamics and you're making everything feel closer to each other. You're making everything feel cohesive. And that's practically what we're doing with this drum bus and practically what we're doing with our group processing. So we want to make everything feel cohesive and reduce the peaks in the sound. I'm just going to pop up a few different plugins that I like using on my group channels over here. So we have Soothe, FabFilter Pro MB, which is a multiband compressor. Then we have the Gullfoss EQ, and another one that I really like is the Split EQ by Eventide, because it lets you separate the transient signal from the tonal signal, which can be really great for melodic group processing and drums as well. Okay, step number 7. Once we finished our mix, we can then highlight the entire mix, Command-Shift-R, and what we're going to do is now export the WAV file. So 24-bit WAV file. Dither we don't need right now. Dither is something that we only need during the mastering stage. So when we're exporting the final version of our track, I usually go for a triangular dither. This just adds a white noise floor to reduce any digital aliasing, but that's a topic for itself, so I'm not going to elaborate on that. No dither for now. Export the mix that we have going on. Just going to put it on my desktop, mixing version 1. So I have the mix ready. Now I can open up a new session and put my mix in here. And I'm going to save this template. So I could create a new folder, call this mixing variants. And we're going to call this mixing V1. And then I can go back to the original project file and redo my mix. So what I would do is now just reset all the channels again and do the mix from the start, right? So we're practicing our mix. And perhaps for the second time, we want to emphasize the clap a bit more. For the third time, we want to take away the clap and emphasize the hi-hats a bit more. So you can create multiple iterations of your mix, keep on bouncing it out, dragging those bounced out versions into your separate mixing session so you can compare which mix sounds better. And you can listen to your mix or your different versions versions of your mix in different environments. You can listen to them on headphones, on speakers, in the car, on a JBL box, on your laptop speakers, anything really. So you get to practice mixing, you get to repeat this process over and over, and you get better at it over time. Tip number 8 is to realize that loudness is in the mix, not in the master. So the more time you spend reducing those peaks in the mix, the easier it will become to master your track, because you won't have a limiter that's overworking all the time. You don't want your limiter to always catch those peaks and make it feel too distorted, too compressed. So you want to do most of the work in the mix. Apply the techniques that I've shown you today, and I guarantee that your mixes will improve to 1000%. If you want to have high quality sounds, make sure to grab them on Lotus Tunes. Those will certainly help you get your mixes right. And also, if you'd like to watch a course, feel free to check out my Afro Masterclass as well. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.